Hello. Yeah, so 75 hard. So I wanted to lose weight because I keep getting fat shamed. I keep getting fat shamed in the fucking comments. And it's funny, you go from when I started, I've basically just got fatter as this podcast has gone on. And so I was like, and I've probably been saying for like 2 years to Danny, I need to lose weight and don't do shit about it. Because, so anyway, Jessica Hodler. Jessica Hoddle, she put this thing up. She said, I'm on day 75 of 75 hard. I was like, what is that? That sounds like something I want to do. So I started it. It's no drinking, no cheat meals, keep to a diet, train twice a day. Once has to be outside, both for 45 minutes. And you got to read 10 pages of book and some other stuff. So I managed 15 days and I was really good. And I'd shifted 9 pounds and I felt good.
Nice.
But I couldn't get a second workout in one day. And so I was like, I broke. And then we're going to go back to it and I didn't. But it was almost like a circuit breaker, like a reset. And so I carried on not drinking. I didn't drink for 35 days. And then I got here and I had a beer and a whiskey with Danny on the first night, but I haven't drunk since. And so I've not given up drinking. I'm just not drinking for the sake of it.
Gotcha.
Just,
Yeah.
if I want to have a beer, I'll have a beer. And if I don't want to have a beer, I won't have a beer.
Good.
Why do you not drink?
No, I
drink like a motherfucker.
I'm not a heavy drinker. I'll drink a few beers a week. That's about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we would have done an afternoon session, I would have thrown down a beer with you guys, but
Dude,
water works.
Odell would have had one at this time. You can have a beer if you want.
I'm not as hardcore as Odell.
I mean, nobody knows what time we're recording.
That's true.
Nice to meet you, Jeff.
Nice to meet you too.
We've been social media friends for a while. Admired you a lot. And Danny said we're going to make a show, which is super cool. I think you're one of the nicest, most rational people on Twitter. We don't get to see too much crazy stuff. But for people who don't know you, Dr. Jeff, tell them all about you.
Sure, I'll try to keep it short. So,
hey man, it's a podcast. Go as long as you want.
All right. So yeah, people like to hear my story. How did a doctor get into finance? So way back in college, which was in the 90s for me, early 90s, I had to decide if I wanted to follow a career in investments or become a doctor. And it was tough for me, but I ended up deciding to become a doctor. As you guys probably know, once you do that, your life is pretty much set for a while. So I did my pre-med stuff. I was a biology major in college, then went to medical school. In between there, by the way, I had 2 years off in between before I applied to medical school. I went to Jerusalem, lived in Jerusalem for about 9 months, worked as a nursing assistant there, which was awesome. Toured around, learned Hebrew and Arabic a bit and some other languages because it was a hospice that I worked at where people would send their basically loved ones to die near the old city. That was awesome. And then a friend of mine came over for the final few months, and then we traveled through Europe, going kind of from place to place because lots of the other volunteers at this hospital or a hospice were from Europe. We were the only 2 Americans there. So that was fantastic. Kind of bounced around in Greece, Italy, and then went up through mostly Western Europe. That was a great experience. So then came back, went to medical school, and then moved from Minnesota, where I grew up, to Wisconsin. Did 6 years of residency, so that's training for radiology, and then I did a fellowship in something called interventional radiology, which is image-guided, minimally invasive surgery. So most people don't totally know what that is, but it's like if you ever hear of people getting stents in their arteries or getting a catheter put in, maybe a port for chemotherapy. I was the guy who did that. I used to poke holes in people, and then if they had a cancer, like a tumor on their kidney, I would put a probe into it and then burn it or freeze it so they wouldn't have to get their whole kidney taken out. So minimally invasive surgeries. Really cool stuff. So I got into private practice in 2008 in Colorado Springs, became a partner a couple of years later in the group, and then, because I can't sit still, got back into investing. So back in 2009, I started a blog teaching people how to invest on their own.
Bought some Bitcoin.
What's that?
Bought some Bitcoin.
Yeah, I bought some Bitcoin in 2000. Actually, I bought it in 2008. So I even front ran Satoshi. Just kidding. No, I didn't know anything about Bitcoin at the time. So teaching people about it, I got picked up quickly by Seeking Alpha and the Motley Fool, and used to write for them. And then I had built up enough of an audience of people who said, "Hey, we like your style. We like it that you're a doctor." That I kind of focused on healthcare, stocks, and those sorts of things back then. they said, hey, could you manage my money? I'm like, oh, I'm just a doctor. I just do this for fun. This is kind of a little side gig. But planted a seed in my brain, and I thought, do I really want to do this surgery stuff, being on call every fourth night for the rest of my life? And then the other downside of interventional radiology is to see inside of patients, you have to usually put radiation into them, which means if I'm standing next to the patient, I'm getting radiated all the time. So in fact, the guy that I took the job from in Colorado Springs, he actually had to retire because he had a brain tumor that they think was probably related to the radiation. So you're standing next to this radiation column, basically. He got a brain tumor on the left side of his head, had a major surgery, and so such is life. But I used to talk to my wife all the time, like, is it worth it? Is it worth doing this to help people, but to also have this risk that I'm going to get a tumor when I'm 50 and die of that? So those are the decisions I made. Out of that came Vailshire Capital Management. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to do this. Life is short. So I started an RIA and a hedge fund called Vailshire Partners. Founded that in 2013. Started managing money professionally in 2014. By 2015, I just got so busy with the two careers that I had to do something. So I gave up the interventional radiology side and just did diagnostic radiology. That's where, so if you go in and get an MRI or a CT scan or X-ray, I'm the doctor that puts a report on that, interprets the results. So I was able to balance that or juggle that for a little bit. Then it got to be too busy even doing that with my group because I was hospital based and in the clinic, so I couldn't really run my financial business and be at the hospital at the same time. I ended up retiring completely from radiology then back in, I believe, 2017. Then I got bored again and got my MBA in finance in there just to kind of have that. Because a lot of people used to get on my case like, oh, doctors are terrible investors. Everybody knows this. Why would I want a doctor, to manage my money? So I'm like, okay. So I went back and got an MBA in finance and did that. So now, I can say MD, MBA, so people can't make fun of me. It was interesting, mostly worthless though. I encourage people. People ask me often, should I go and get an MBA? Is it worth it? I say no. It's just not. You can learn so much more by just starting your own business, investing on your own, making your own mistakes. I learn from mistakes. I've made practically every mistake you could possibly make. Try to stay humble enough to learn from them. So anyways, now we're up to 2019. I went back and I missed radiology a bit. And I was done with my MBA. So I did something called teleradiology. I work from home. So I was able to do Vailshire on one side of my office. And then I have 6 monitors set up on the other side of the office where I was reading radiology for a New York-based group. And I did that for a couple of years, and I'm almost getting to the end of this. So we're up to 2021. 2021, Vailshire was growing so quickly, and it was still just me. But so I needed some help. I could either get help or be done with radiology. So I quit radiology again. I'm going to sound like just this crazy journeyman. I don't mean to be. I'm usually actually pretty dedicated to what I do, and I stay focused. But radiology is kind of this love-hate relationship that I have, an off and on again relationship. So 2021, I retired again from teleradiology, just did Vailshire. And now fast forward to today, I'm actually, so I haven't done radiology for about a year and a half. I'm starting it up again in August, so actually next month, to do it. And but kind of a part-time, full-time gig, and I'm gonna hire another person for Vailshire to handle the front end, to do all the operation side of things, all the investor relations. And I'm gonna be the guy in the background just doing the investments, writing my newsletters, doing interviews, things like that. So that's where we are today.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
What a journey. So it makes me that thing. I try to get out, but they pull me back in. I keep getting
Hotel
dragged
California?
Back in. Yeah, I keep getting dragged back into radiology.
Yes.
So on the radiology side of things, when you do teleradiology, what exactly is it you're doing? You're remotely reviewing scans?
Yeah, so it's like I'm one of the New York-based radiologists. That I just have my 6 computers on my desk, and I'm seeing the same work list that they're seeing. So you're in somewhere in New York, you go get an MRI or a CT scan, it pops up on a list. I can be in Colorado reading that study. The internet.
When's AI going to read that study?
Soon. So I think the first specialty of medicine to go down to AI will be radiology. It just makes sense. It's just pattern recognition of images. Way more complex than most people think it is, just because you can understand basic anatomy, but everybody is a little bit different. And then to see how different disease processes affect the body, and then how does it affect it on CT? How does it affect it on the different sequences of MRI? And there's tons of different sequences. What does it look like on ultrasound? What does it look like on X-ray? There's a lot more complexity to it. I tell people it's sort of like self-driving versus full self-driving. It's super easy to program a car to drive down Phoenix in the middle of the day with no rain and no people around. But when you get, roads without markings or, road construction and then there's people darting out on the road and maybe a deer jumps out in front of you, like how do you program for that kind of stuff? It's much more complicated. So radiology is like that too. But that said, I think my plan is to work in as a radiologist until the field dies and is consumed by AI. And then ironically, I'm also in Bitcoin, which I think is going to consume the field of finance and kind of take down Wall Street over time as well. So I plan to be out of a job completely within 10 years or so for both of these fields.
It'll probably be about the right age to retire.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. The AI side of things is really interesting. I keep getting sucked into it. I talk about it a lot on the podcast, mainly because I use it nearly every day now. I use it to write things. I've been using it for design concepts now. I've been using Midjourney. It's a tool that saves a lot of time, makes us more efficient. So I'm all for AI right now. But I have heard that on the radiology side of things that there is an expectation that AI will be more accurate and faster. And it will get to the point where it's almost like the AI will do the first diagnosis and then pass it over to who you would probably tell me who that would go to for.
Yeah, so that's how I view it too. So first of all, it's almost good enough already, but I think the medical community will resist it, right? Because they don't want to lose their jobs. Being a radiologist is pretty lucrative also.
So they're already testing it?
They're already oh, sure. There's lots of radiology, AI-based radiology programs out there. But what will happen, I think we're going to have this sort of awkward hybrid period for a while, maybe 5-10 years, where they'll implement AI, but they'll always have a radiologist on top of it. They'll call it an assistant, a radiologist assistant. And then people are at some point going to realize, hey, it does at least as good of a job, if not better, way more efficient, way more cost productive. So I think what we can do is at some point, they're just going to be like, what do we even need the radiologist for? So I could sort of see it maybe having a hospital having one radiologist and then having AI do everything, but the radiologist oversees the conclusions. And then at some point, they're going to be like, look, we don't even need the radiologist. So
there's probably something in it with how comfortable the patient would feel too. It's like getting on a plane. Like I know the planes fly themselves, but you wouldn't get on with one without a pilot.
Right. You still want to know somebody's in the cockpit,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, exactly the same with medicine, I think, too. And
Well, it's funny, my dad was an aircraft engineer, and he said to me, the biggest risk to a plane is still the pilot error.
Sure.
Is the biggest risk. If you actually go and look at a number of the recent crashes over the last 10 years, you'll see most of them come down to some form of pilot error. And so eventually we'll get to a stage where planes will entirely fly themselves, but I don't think I'm ever getting on a plane without a pilot just in case.
oh, you will someday.
Oh, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I don't
We
like
all will,
it.
10 years from now.
I hate flying as it is. So the AI now is already as good, but I guess the fear is AI is still learning. It could make mistakes.
Yep. Pretty much. Again, it's useful to think about it for driving, right? So people just still don't quite trust it. I have a Tesla, actually. I have a bunch of old, terrible cars, and then this fancy Tesla. It drives this full self-driving. It does it really well about 95% of the time now. But about 5% of the time, we almost do die, and we almost hit people, and we go over curbs a little bit. And so it's still learning. And I like to kind of test it. I know that each little mistake it makes, and probably my reaction, they're probably watching me freak out and grab the wheel and do something. So it still has some learning to do, but I think of radiology as the same. It's still going to do it. I think in general, it could already do lots of scan reading better than radiologists do, but it still makes some kind of glaring mistakes, and it's working on that. So as the database builds, it will get better and better.
But I'm assuming radiologists also themselves miss some things,
Sure.
and there are times that maybe AI is finding something that the radiologist doesn't find.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that self-driving is kind of interesting. So if you're testing it, you still got to be pretty alert.
Oh, yeah. So on the highway, no, I barely pay attention because it does so well. Like I go to Colorado Springs to Denver on a regular basis, and it's fantastic. And if you're in stop and go traffic, it's great. You barely need to pay attention because it just sort of keeps the distance from the car in front of you and changes lanes if it needs to. But when you're in a busy city, it's terrifying to use it. So
Right, and so if you're on the highway and you don't need to do anything, what do you do?
I pay attention, like we all should. I do. It's easy. It's easier to get distracted by your phone and do other things. Yeah.
What is? I don't even know if there's any laws around this that you're still meant to be fully. But I have seen the videos of like people asleep or on their phones.
Yeah, you could. I mean, I could basically nap. But well, I say that, but Tesla still makes you about every 20 seconds you have to shake the steering wheel to let them know you're there.
Right.
So they don't let you fall asleep.
How did that one work though? I've seen a video of someone asleep.
Yeah, there's something.
What happens if
Something
you don't
fishy about
shake
that.
it though? It pull over?
Then it freaks out. So the lights start flashing and then noises, and then it actually just shuts down, and it won't let you do the full self-driving if you kind of break the rules too many times in a row.
See, it's a weird thing. I actually enjoy driving. I like the process of driving. Like when we were away making films, the crew were like, well, should we drive so you can rest? It's like, no, I enjoy driving. Like I can't imagine a world where the car drives for me.
I said the exact same thing before I got it, but then you get really used to it quickly. It's just so convenient.
I don't want to buy an Elon car anyway. Fuck that guy. Yeah, what a fascinating career. So, and it's cool that you get to do both.
Yeah.
So what is the edge do you think you got in finance? What is it? Because you said people liked what you had to say, people are interested, wanted you to manage their money. What was your edge? Where was your...
I think it's not what most people think. It's not being smarter in finance. It's not having better degrees. I think it's people. Honestly, it's humility. It's patience. Those sort of things help you to do better. Knowing yourself. Are you more of a trader? Are you more of a long-term investor? Do you want to short? Do you want to just be kind of a long-only type investor? If Greg Foss says this regularly too, but like I've made every mistake you can make so far. I'm sure I have a lot more to make, but I just kind of look at it like, you know what, you got to stay humble. You got to keep learning. I always do this sounds trite, but it's true. Just always what's best for my clients. I'll take a hit if I have to, if it's a benefit to my clients. Having that in mind, I will tell you though that, I literally used to have patients dying on my table in front of me. They would get in a car accident. They'd be internally hemorrhaging. And I was the guy that had to get in there with a catheter and find the artery and stop the bleeding so they didn't die. It's more stressful to me to actually manage money. Managing money in a bear market, when you're losing money for your clients, and I'm losing to the S&P 500, it's so stressful. It keeps me up at night. I wonder, what am I doing wrong? Kind of try to, how can I make my system better? I would just tell people, a lot of people think, what a great job. You just sit there and, parasite, siphon off of people. I used to think that same thing before I went into finance. You're just some parasite. And I honestly, I think most of the industry is that way, but I think for fund managers who really love investing and who are in it for the love of investing, there is a big value add. But it's not without stress for sure. So I don't really being a doctor doesn't give me much of an advantage other than I'm analytical and I'm kind of a systems-based, engineer-based investor. I think some of the best investors are that way as well. And some of the best macro thinkers, I think of like Preston Pish, Lynn Alden, these guys are former engineers. They think in terms of systems and how can I improve this system? And so that's what I do as well. That's sort of how my brain works logically, is I always want to have a better investing system for my clients and for my fund.
Well, we'll get into the wider system, but I thought it was quite interesting when you talked about doing an MBA and it's a complete waste of time. My son just quit uni. He barely did finish his first year. He was doing an art degree. He came home at Easter and it was clear it wasn't working for him. And me and my dad were there and we had the conversation with him, said, well, you got 3 more years to go. If you don't enjoy it, you don't do the work, well, there's an option. You can come and work for me, your dad, see how you get on. And he took that. I think it was a lucky get out for him because, he was behind on the work. But he went to my dad after a couple of weeks and he said, I've learned more in 2 weeks working with my dad than I've done in all of my schooling.
Sure.
And that whole university thing is, well, I used to say university. We had this lad, when I used to have my advertising agency, one of his teachers got in touch and said, look, he wants to go to university and study advertising and marketing, but he wants to work in the advertising and marketing industry, but he's not sure he wants to go to university. What do you think he should do? I said, well, you definitely don't go to university to learn advertising. I said, if he comes and works for me for 3 years, even if you work for free, he'll be more employable than anyone who's done a degree, but he can't work for free, so we'll pay him. So he'll get paid, he won't get debt, and he'll be more employable than anyone else. I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning, but Will's in a similar scenario. I think the majority of degrees are an absolute waste of time. If you're going to university to have fun and drink beers and party, fine, go for 1 year. but I think is a complete waste of time. And you can have, I've employed people who've come in with a first, and the first 6 months they're working for you, you're just training them how to work. It's not it's the conditioning for how hard you have to work, how you deliver. I think university is, it's probably necessary for medicine and law and accounting, but certainly for the majority of industries.
Yeah, and if I could interrupt, necessary only because the regulators make it so. Like, you can't be a doctor in the U.S. unless you have the appropriate credentials.
I'm okay with that one, by the way.
Right, exactly. But to your point, I think we're moving to a world back to the master-apprentice relationship, which is awesome in a lot of ways. And I think that's something that Bitcoin affords us, is we'll be able to move into that lower time preference training where people just really develop the skills of their master and become an excellent apprentice and become masters themselves. I'm excited for that era, and I think you could do that easily in medicine, actually, ironically, And it's not easy. The training is not easy, but I think that you would be at least as effective of a surgeon or as a physician if you could work just closely with another physician for years and years. And I don't know that you need to go through all those hoops. A lot of med school today is you're doing this sort of extracurricular kind of things, right? You're learning training and, well, I don't even know how far we want to go in this, but you're learning non-medical training that is deemed important by the state and by the regulators, but doesn't necessarily make you a better doctor. And so,
what do you mean by that, non-medical training?
So things like, well, first of all, things that are important. Like I think what's extremely important in medicine and healthcare, as we all know, right? Nutrition and exercise. That's like the foundation of health, and sleep. Those three things.
There's no money in that.
It's hard to make money in that, and that's legitimate. I think that first of all, the pendulums swing very strongly in both ways, and then usually the extremes are wrong, right? The truth is usually somewhere in the middle, whether we're talking about COVID, whether we're talking about how doctors, big pharma, right? The one of the big narratives out there is that medicine is just owned by big pharma. That's sort of true, and there are truths to that, but that's not totally true, right? Doctors are independent thinkers. Most doctors go into medicine because they truly want to help people. They're smart people who want to go out and help others. They're service-oriented, kind of like military people. A lot of people go into the military, think they're going to do good for the world, and use their military and physical skills for that. But the problem is the system is broken. And that's the thing. Like, so these systems, and I would say because of government's hand on that and because of the broken money, it affects all of these systems. So good people go into this system and then they get trapped within it. Even in medicine, even though I'm going back into it and I have this ongoing off and on again, off again relationship, I just feel like a cog in this healthcare system. I'm not the one making these decisions that makes it so clunky and inefficient and expensive for people. Super frustrating for me. I used to do procedures on people, and I would have patients come in and be like, I can't afford this. Like, I was just diagnosed with cancer. I'm here, maybe I'm going to do a breast biopsy or a thyroid biopsy or a liver biopsy or something. That's the kind of stuff I used to do. They'd be like, I just can't afford this procedure. I had some clients, I had some patients who would, they would be just in tears. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now. I need to get this diagnosis, but I can't afford the many thousands of dollars, So the healthcare system is so inefficient. And then there's people like me who just truly want to help people, but you're stuck in this system. And then one other case in point, one of these patients who was just sobbing about how expensive the procedures are. And she was very angry with me because on the bill it says, Dr. Jeff Ross charged you, $6,000 for this procedure. And I'm like, just so you know, here's how this works.
First, I don't get $6,000.
I don't get $6,000. Like, I actually got about $60 from that procedure. So if you want to talk about whether or not that's fair for me spending an hour to do this biopsy and getting paid $60, we can talk about that. I said, but you should be angry at the hospital. The hospital is charging you $5,000 for this room. They're taking the fees from this. And then the insurers in between, it's this whole opaque system where the insurers are dealing with the hospitals and the clinics, and the doctors are left out of these negotiations. We don't know how much this patient X, is getting charged, or patient Y, and it's different for each patient based on their insurer, if they have it or not. It's just this crazy, opaque, ridiculous system. And because of these inefficiencies, the people in the middle, the insurers and the administrators, they're just siphoning off the money. And the doctor-patient relationship gets left off to the side, and that's almost a secondary event. Like that's what instigates the fees, but it almost doesn't even need to happen as far as the people in the middle are concerned. And so very, very frustrating system. And I think a lot of like the military is like that. People who as an American, we deal with this as well, right? I love America. I love the ideals of America, the freedom that it's supposed to imply, and I love supporting vets. Colorado Springs is a huge town for veterans and for active officers because we have the Air Force Academy and an Army base there as well. And the military people will tell you this, they go on these missions that they don't agree with. And they're wondering, what the heck am I doing halfway around the globe, doing some crazy mission, killing people that I don't know, for what, And so it leaves a lot of people asking, like, who's in charge of these systems? Like, what am I doing? I thought I was here doing good, but I feel like guilty being a part of this system. I have that as a doctor. I know they have that in the military. School teachers have that because they're told what they have to teach, what they can say, what they can't say. It's frustrating for everybody. And it's this whole system-wide process of all of these major US-based organizations that are just broken and corrupt down to the core.
Well, this is where I think Mark Moss has a really valid point. I've had Mark on the show a few times, and he talks about this kind of peak centralization. And whilst I don't agree with Mark on everything, I think he's entirely right. We have reached this peak centralization where we have these massive institutions. It doesn't even matter if it's the UK or the US. I think the US is worse. And I think we have these global institutions, whether it's the World Health Organization, whether it's the UN, where we have reached this peak centralization. And the incentive structures of these entities is such that we aren't delivering. We are massively inefficient. And it's really interesting when you brought up the military. There's a really good documentary the BBC produced called Once Upon a Time in Iraq, I think it is. It's a 4-part series. And it's really, really worth watching. If we dig out the link, I'll send it to you. Cool. And there's a moment in there where a soldier was being interviewed and he was like, I don't know what we're doing here or why we're here. What are we doing? We're meant to be bringing freedom? Right. Like, this isn't making any sense. And I think a lot of soldiers got disillusioned with that entire war. Going back to the health service, though, we've talked about it a lot on here, and Bitcoin definitely changes you. For me, I've definitely moved towards somebody who believes in that we should have much smaller government. I'm not completely anti-government. I just don't like where we've got to at the moment. But I've always struggled with those who don't like the idea of, say, the NHS in the UK. And by the way, the NHS has a huge issues right now that definitely need fixing. But I have always liked the fact that if I break my leg, I am not going to be bankrupt from that. Or if I have cancer, I'm going to get treated. And that's anybody. And it's really hard to argue against that. Nobody in the UK wants rid of the NHS. If you had a vote, what do you reckon, Danny? What percentage would keep it?
That would be tiny. Keep it, yeah, 89%.
Yeah, sure. Maybe even high 90s.
But I think at the same time, I've said this before on the show, I think most people would agree it needs some kind of reform. Definitely
needs a reform. The problem is it's it's a vortex for money. Just more money goes in and it stays inefficient. And my mum worked in the NHS. She was a nurse, and she often talked about there was just this massive growth of red tape and bureaucracy that got in the way of nursing. So it does need reform. And I've had exposure to the US health system. Danny had to rush me to hospital one day with one of my SVTs. And you know all about those,
I used to treat that kind of stuff.
Yeah. There's, I've had that all tested now. I had an echo and a stress test. By the way, can I just say, that was the weirdest thing. So they put a drug in me to increase my heart rate. And so I was laying there and it was just going thud, thud. That was it freaked me out.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's not, but I've been given the all clear. I've got no heart issues at all, which is great. But I've had exposure to both. And I think the top end healthcare in the US is definitely better than the UK. I know, a friend of mine, they treated their son for cancer in the US because it's better treatment. But anyone can get treated. And private healthcare works really well in the UK in that you're essentially subsidizing the NHS. And my health insurance is £200 a month for the highest quality care you can get. If I have cancer, I'm seeing a consultant within 24 hours. and you start treatment immediately. When I had my back surgery, when I had my MRI for my herniated disc, I was in surgery 3 days later, and whatever it cost, I think it was $9,000 for the operation, was just paid for by my insurance. So we have a system which obviously collectively works better for people. Individually, not so, because we have waiting lists, et cetera, et cetera. And I've really struggled to let that go, despite people going, oh, you fucking socialist or whatever. I've really struggled. So I'm really intrigued to know how you would fix healthcare, how you think it should work. Yeah, that's interesting. Danny's just pulled up. Just 10% of Britons think ministers have right policies on NHS. One problem, there's so many problems with the NHS. One of the problems is every election campaign, every single party will say, we're going to give more money to the NHS. I'd love you to find, Danny, the increase in the NHS budget over time.
All right, let me look.
So I'm rambling lots of different things here. I've been speaking to people in the healthcare sector and been finding out why there's been massive increases in wait times in accident emergency and big issues okay, so here we go. So in 2008, 2009, the NHS budget, I'm assuming that's billions, was 121.5 billion. This year's going to be 180 billion. So that's a 50% increase in what's that, 10, 12 years? I know you can account for some inflation, but that's massive. But in that time, waiting lists have gone up. And so they said one of the big issues now is when I spoke to both a nurse who worked in an A&E and I spoke to a paramedic, and they said people think of the NHS now like they think of Uber or Deliveroo. I've got any issue, I'm going to phone up. I'm just going to try and get treated rather than wait for the doctor. And they're dealing with a huge amount of anxiety and panic attacks. And so they have a lot of people come to the hospital, like I've been with my SVTs, where there's nothing wrong with them. And so that's been a big issue. So I've rambled on for ages there. How would you fix healthcare?
Well, I'll tell you how I wouldn't fix healthcare, because I'm 48 now, so I've been around the block a few times.
Looking good for 48, man.
Yeah, look, I feel old. Thank you.
I feel great.
Yeah.
Check me out.
That's right. So what I've been hearing since the 80s is that the solution needs to come from inside, right? Politicians are if you just elect the right person and get the right president in place and get the right, set of Democrats versus Republicans, then we can fix healthcare. It cannot be fixed from the inside. Completely agree with that. Jeff Booth talks about this kind of stuff a lot, and I totally agree. Like, you can't fix a problem system from within the system. You need to get outside of the system and create an all new system. So here, I'll just do a quick summary of things that I think about healthcare that I think would be helpful. First of all, health insurance, to your point, has been basically bastardized. It no longer means insurance in the pure sense of the word, right? So for instance, in America, at least, we have fire insurance on our house. My house actually burned down in 2012. We had this big fire in Colorado Springs called the Waldo Canyon Fire. It came out, took down 370 houses in our neighborhood.
Holy shit.
Yeah, crazy. So I lost 99% of all my stuff. That's a story for another day. But we had fire insurance, right? For that one crazy thing that you need, when you need fire insurance, it's here for you when it's just the worst possible catastrophic event happens. What is healthcare? Healthcare in the US, and it sounds like the NHS is similar. You go in if you have a sniffling, some sniffles, you have an earache, you have an SVT, or you have cancer, or you get flown in from a helicopter because you got in a horrible crash, in the mountains or something. So I would say that, number one, insurance should go back to being insurance, health insurance. It should be for, and the concept that's closest to this in the US is high deductible health plans. So basically, if you have a catastrophic event, if you're in a terrible car accident, your whole family or something, and you're going to incur, hundreds of thousands of dollars of bills, you definitely should have insurance for that kind of thing. If you get diagnosed with cancer, that's going to require, tens of thousands of dollars of treatment, you should have insurance for that. For basic stuff, you should not have insurance. You should just
break your finger.
If you break your finger, right? If you have a cold, or maybe you have COVID or not, and you want to go get tested, insurance should not cover that kind of stuff. So that's the first problem. You have to delineate what is a catastrophic event and what is just kind of routine healthcare. Routine healthcare should be paid, I believe, completely different than how it is now. Right now, the system is totally opaque. The patients don't know how much things cost. The doctors don't know how much things cost. I tell people this, imagine going into McDonald's and saying, hey, I want a Big Mac and fries and maybe a Coke. And they're like, okay, and they just gave it to you, and they're saying, we'll bill you in a month for that. And you'll be like, well, how much does it cost? And I'm like, we'll tell you in a month.
And you get a bill from the bun company, you get a bill from the burger, a bill from the cheese company.
Exactly, and that's what happens. I just had some major health stuff back in December. I had this nose surgery because I couldn't breathe very well, and then it went bad, and I got this face infection that was crazy, and I had to have all this stuff done. Then I had some clots in my arm that then went to my lungs. I had something called pulmonary embolism, and
Hold on, that's dangerous.
Yeah, I almost died. It was pretty wild. What? I had a really rough 3-month stretch here a couple months ago.
Dude.
But thankfully, got past it. Thank you, Lord. But I got to see the system from the inside as well, right? So now I'm the patient. I'm sitting in this junky ER in our town, waited for 5 hours to be seen, and I'm having severe chest pain. I literally can't breathe. I'm telling him, I said, I'm a doctor. I was telling the people, I'm a doctor. I don't speak in hyperbole generally. I'm telling you, this is the worst pain I've ever felt. I can't breathe. I feel like I'm going to die. I think I might die. This is how bad this is. And they're like, okay. And they sent me off in the waiting room. But they started an IV, put a tag on my wrist, and then I just sat there. Again, you don't know how much it's going to cost. Don't know who's going to see me. An ER doctor, and one of the times I went to the ER, came to see me and said, hi, I'm not actually doing anything, but I'm in charge of the ER tonight, so I just wanted to, say hi, everything good? And I said, yep. Literally, that was our encounter. I got a $1,000 bill from her a month later. $1,000. And I'm like, you literally did nothing other than say hi to me,
But that's a scam.
Yeah, it's all a scam. So again, opaque pricing, filled with middlemen who benefit from the opaque pricing. How would I fix it? The first step I would do is make it so just you have legitimate pricing. The best doctors get paid the most to do the most complex procedures, right? Like you would expect for anything. If you want to buy a fancy car, whatever, from a fancy dealership, the highest performance, you would expect to pay more. You pay less for, less quality doctors doing easier procedures, those kind of things. And just be like, here's how much it costs. If you don't like that, go shop around. That's great, right? Bring some competition back into it, like an actual free market. It's the farthest away from a free market that you could possibly get. And again, I think the people in the middle love it. I always say anything the government touches, it turns inefficient and opaque, and it's tough to read. It happened in education, healthcare, military. We could kind of go down the list for all of the things that happen. So that's what needs to happen. We need to bring it back to a free market system. That's step number one. That would reduce costs, I think, dramatically by 50 to 70% just right off the bat. I can stop there.
No, keep going. I mean, this is fascinating. Who's milking the system? Who is taking a significant portion of money for doing with this least contribution?
Sure. So again, and I'm not saying these are bad people because I'm sure there's people listening to this right now. And you've probably seen these charts, the growth of healthcare administrators relative to providers. So if you look at a chart from 1970 to today, so over the last 50 years, the healthcare providers is this tiny little baseline at the bottom that you can barely see, and administrators have gone parabolic.
Can you find that chart, Dan?
Yeah.
I remember Marty Bent posted it a long time ago.
Okay, yeah, it gets posted a lot. So that's number one, right? That's clearly highly inefficient.
I think he's got it.
Okay, cool.
So for anyone listening, Danny's just pulling up this chart.
Yeah, that's great.
Wow. So physicians has grown from percent growth from 1977, should we say?
What happened in 1971?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Holy shit. Yeah. So the chart runs from 1971, and you'd say that's annualized growth is it's
32%, 3,200% growth in administrators. So you say, why is U.S. healthcare expensive?
So physicians has grown what? What's that? 150%? 150%, and administrators 3,500%.
Since 1970.
Yeah, the work is done by the physicians.
Right.
So who are these administrators? What are they doing?
They're the people that sit in their rooms and tell doctors what they should do and make us mad because we just want to do what we think is best. So there's them, and obviously I'm oversimplifying, and I actually don't even mean to offend people because again, administrators go into this thinking that they're going to do good for people by being a healthcare administrator, but it's all part of the problem. The problem is the broken system, not the individuals.
It went parabolic between 91 and say 96. It's gone from in 1991 500%, in 96 to what's that, about 2,300%?
Yeah.
What the fuck happened in the 90s?
Was it something to do with Clinton, Hillary care? I don't know.
Crazy.
Something definitely happened, and I would say it's not good. And you can look at the effects now. So so to me, that's the number one reason. Why is U.S. healthcare so inefficient and expensive? Well, there's your answer, at least part of your answer right there.
Is any part of that to do with fear of litigation, that they have put procedures in place?
Yes. So that's another huge thing, right? So the regulators come down and they say, I think it's a good idea that you do A, B, C, and D. And then it turns from a good idea to, well, let's put this down in writing, to let's make this law. You have to do this as a doctor. Otherwise, you're not going to work here anymore.
Well, that's the comparison I had from the UK to the US. So when I have an SVT in the UK, I go to hospital, wait in A&E, they see me, they do an ECG, they do a blood test, and then I go home. Mm-hmm. In the US, I had an ECG, I had 4 vials of blood taken for multiple tests, and I was given 2 drugs at the end to take. I can't remember what they were. And then I had to sign a bunch of forms. Mm-hmm. And I was like, why am I getting the drugs here and not in the UK? And why am I signing all these forms? And the obvious reason is the fear of litigation should have something happened to me afterwards. And that was just a super interesting comparison between the two countries.
That's American healthcare also. So the fear of litigation is real. And so malpractice insurance is a massive industry for physicians. If everybody knows that humans make mistakes. They even know that doctors make mistakes, but God forbid you make a mistake on my exam, right? Or I'm coming after you. So that CYA medicine, cover your butt medicine, is massively prevalent. So case in point, if you come in, say you're a 10-year-old kid, you got in a wrestling match with your brother and you fell and you hit your head. What happens so most countries, they'd look at you and they'd say, how you doing? Any issues with your vision kind of thing, do a little test or something. Any headache? Maybe a little bit, kind of hurts. You're probably fine, right? That's kind of how most of the world works. In the US, you would come into the hospital, you would get a head CT, which costs, probably $1,000 minimum to have that done. And even though the doctor says he's fine, he has a little residual headache, he has no other symptoms of concussion, no symptoms of head bleed or anything other dangerous, we should probably just let him go. In the US, you would absolutely get a head CT because of CYA, right? You have because of the 1 in 1,000 times that there actually is a bleed in the head, and if you miss it, you're toast. Like, you're just dead meat. So you have to cover your butt.
I think this is the problem with centralized institutions. You can take it to everything. These bureaucracies is that trying to have a 0 failure rate across everything. And you can transfer that. You can take it with your example on healthcare, but you can also take it into sports, like kids not being allowed to fail when they're early on, or you can take just anywhere. There's no allowance for failure rate. So a really brilliant tweet. It was a promoted tweet as well, which I thought was quite interesting. And it was a guy clearly wanting to grow his profile. And it said, what if we taught children that failing is learning?
Love it.
Yeah. It's that desire for a 0 failure rate. And also that conditioning we've kind of almost conditioned society that everything is someone else's fault. Mm-hmm. And if something happens that's bad to us, we need someone to blame or someone to pay for it.
Right.
We've gone beyond this thing. There's look, there's failure rates, there's accidents rates. We've gone beyond that. I think that was one of the biggest issues in COVID, is that we were trying to get to a situation with the 0 failure rate. We're going to fight. I got sucked into it. We're going to fight this. We're going to try and get to a situation where nobody catches this virus that spreads.
This massively contagious
virus. And if we lock everybody down, that nobody will get it. And when we open up, it'll be gone.
Right.
And I just find it's everywhere. Okay, so just to bring this back almost to Bitcoin, we'll get your origin story. But has Bitcoin helped with give you a lens to look at things like this? Then?
Absolutely. I would say the number one reason is because Bitcoin forces an honest unit of accounting on whatever it touches. So you can't mess around with it, right? Like you can with the dollar, right? The dollar is wink, wink, nod, nod. Hey, hook me up, print some money, and I'll be the first recipient. The Cantillon effect. Bitcoin does not work like that, right? So that honest unit of account is kind of number one. Number two, as we all know, it gives you that lower time preference. So like, how can I build today something that will grow and become something beautiful and awesome and helpful tomorrow? Bitcoin affords you that time versus fiat, which doesn't. Fiat, you feel like I gotta do something now. Like if I'm a politician, I gotta say the right thing to get elected so I can do my thing now. I don't care if I'm screwing the next generation or even 4 years from now. I don't care if I'm screwing them. I need to do what I got to do today to get elected. I got to spend the money today because it's depleting, it's melting in purchasing power right before our eyes. So Bitcoin changes, to me, it just sort of changes everything. And in medicine, because of what I was talking about earlier, where it's this opaque system, right, of payment, it's not a free market, even remotely. Nobody, including doctors, have no idea how much this procedure is going to cost. If I read a CAT scan for somebody, like, is it going to cost them $500, $5,000, $10,000? I just don't know. That we're out of the loop on that system. And so I think Bitcoin would bring back more of a free market to medicine, and that would be a wonderful thing. And then the obvious thing about Bitcoin, and we don't have to go down this tangent right now, but obviously it's designed to increase purchasing power over time versus the government fiat system is designed to deplete purchasing power over time. And so if you're just in medicine, healthcare costs in the US are world famous for how much they've just totally been let out of the bag, right? They're insane. Nobody can afford healthcare. You pay £200 a month for NHS. We pay $2,000 a month for crappy healthcare.
With a big deductible.
With a huge deductible, right? Yeah, $20,000 deductible or something. So
do you know about the deductible?
Yeah. We've got you covered, right? Insurance companies are always there for you until you need them. That's kind of my standard mantra that I tell my patients that. You think you have insurance, you think you're being covered, but you're not. You're covered after you pay your deductible. You got to factor in what you pay each month. You could buy a house for what you spend on health insurance if you save that money for 4 or 5 years or so. So I'm digressing here, but Bitcoin, and what it represents and taking that personal responsibility is another huge thing, right? That's another funny thing about America is we're two different people groups. We're ultra super healthy individuals, and we're just the most horribly, unhealthy, obese population on the planet as well. Depends what kind of population you're looking at. So that taking responsibility for yourself, right? Doing things like just eating well. You're talking about your exercise plan, just walking, getting off your dumb butt for a couple hours a day, right? And walking around the neighborhood and getting some sun and getting enough sleep. That literally, if you could just do that in the US with our just massively overweight population, you could reduce healthcare expenditures by a definitely noticeable amount. But again, to your point earlier, how do doctors make money on that? Well, they can't really, right? It's just giving good advice. Like if people would just listen and actually have self-discipline, take personal responsibility. It's what we talked about. You guys brought up at the discussion last night with Preston and Odell. Taking personal responsibility, right? Being like, I can take ownership of my Bitcoin in cold storage. And so many people put their hands up and they act like they're victims and I need somebody to do this for me, poor me. It's like, well, sure, there will be groups and organizations that will do that for you, but you're losing your freedom then, right? You're going to have to get permission, sort of like with COVID. We're going to tell you can move or you can get out of your house or you can travel, but we're going to protect you, right? It's all under the guise of protection, but we're going to take away your freedom then, if that's what you want us to do. So,
well, I love the personal responsibility side of Bitcoin. I've been putting weight on ever since I started this podcast. Honestly, the length of this podcast, I have probably put on close to 40 pounds.
Nice.
Yeah, like 3.5 stone, right?
All muscle?
I wish. And the reason it's happened is me.
Yeah.
It's my choices. I can make the excuse, well, I'm traveling with work. Well, yeah, but I can still cook I have Daddy cooking for me these days. But I can still choose to eat healthy. I can still choose to drink less. I can still choose to go for a walk. And I just didn't. I took no personal responsibility. Yeah. It's entirely my fault. And I love that Bitcoin brings back this personal responsibility. One of the guys, I didn't answer it, but I don't know if you remember last night, one of these guys brought up the question. He said about he talked about the wealth disparity that will happen with Bitcoin. We're going to have some people who are going to be fabulously wealthy and others who don't have a lot of Bitcoin. And I thought, well, the good thing about that is it's going to bring back the personal responsibility for your money, because there's going to be less to go around from the government. You're not back to the Breedlove interview where Breedlove talked about one of the problems with democracy is you're voting other people's money to yourself. You can have less ability to vote other people's money to yourself, so you're going to have to get out there and work. Again, personal responsibility. I love that side of things. As somebody who has in certain areas of my life had complete ill discipline, I'm a big fan of that. I did write something down here, actually. You said politicians have to say the right thing to get voted. What's been super interesting right now is, I brought it up last night, is that all these presidential candidates, they're all pro-Bitcoin. They're saying the right thing to get voted in. Now, I believe that RFK is a Bitcoiner. I don't believe that Vivek and DeSantis really are Bitcoiners. But the game theory is now working out that they have to be, because they want that voting block. It's kind of weird. Like the game theory of Bitcoin, everything always works in the right direction. Everything's good for Bitcoin.
If you wait long enough.
Yeah.
Everything does. All roads do lead to Bitcoin. But it's frustrating to wait. For those of us who figured it out early on, it seems like it's taking forever, right? Let's go. Like let's change the world. Let's get the whole monetary system figured out. We can do it, right? We have all the pieces in place. But the world isn't ready for it.
Well, yeah, you couldn't have it overnight. It was like I think it was Scott Horton I interviewed and talked about, he's a libertarian. And I think he even wrote an article on this. If there was the big red button to get rid of government, he wouldn't press it because it would be catastrophic. It would be bloody. It would be a revolution that leads to a lot of death.
Yes.
There needs to be a transition. And it's the same with Bitcoin. It's almost like, I don't know how much of this was Satoshi genius and how much was luck, but the halving creates this amazing cycle that gives us step changes every 4 years. Every 4 years, we step change the amount of people who come on board, the amount of companies there are. It's allowing us to transition from one kind of paradigm to the next, hopefully as a peaceful revolution.
Right, because the slower it takes, right, and the more people you can sort of get on board, the more likely it's going to be peaceful. I totally agree too. I think it would rapidly disintegrate into chaos. I'll tweet out things like, "Hey, if I was a president, the first thing I would do is just cancel all government programs today and put us on a Bitcoin standard." It would be just pure chaos, obviously, right? But we would climb out of it. Humans climb out of chaos, like we climbed out of World War II. So you can rebuild, but we would obviously prefer to do this without loss of life and keep geopolitical tensions down as much as possible. So I think there is wisdom in it taking long, and I agree that 4-year cycle, about 3 year and 11-month cycle that Satoshi started. I think there is some wisdom in that. I don't know if he foresaw that or if it was just luck, or just fortunate. But I think it's good for America. It's good for the world as well. Hopefully, it will help us transition peacefully. Yeah. I think that's what we all want. In
your role as a investment manager, is Bitcoin part of it? Are you advising on Bitcoin? And what cautions do you have with that? Because you're advising a completely different asset from kind of equities and
So I'll give you my little Bitcoin origin story. It all kind of ties in here. So as a fund manager, I'm always looking for the assets with the best risk adjusted return, so the highest Sharpe ratio. And obviously Bitcoin, came onto my radar. For me, it was about 2015 that I started looking. I think I first started buying back when it was hundreds of dollars. I still remember, by the way, thinking about, I can't believe that someday the price of one Bitcoin might be as much as an ounce of gold. And then I actually distinctly remember the morning. I remember where I was sitting. I'm like, Bitcoin is more than an ounce of gold right now. I was telling my wife, she's like, okay. And I'm like, why do I care? I'm like, this is amazing. We just didn't think it was ever going to get there. So
my first Bitcoin was £80.
Dang, way to go. Sub 100.
What was yours?
I think it was about $450, something like that.
Oh, yeah, wow. Nice. But I don't have any of the Bitcoin from 2013. I bought it for the Silk Road. Tim Draper has 3.5 of my Bitcoin.
Because why?
Because he bought the Silk Road Bitcoin.
Oh, funny.
Yeah, I said it to him. I was like, "Can I have my fucking Bitcoin back?" He wouldn't give it to me.
You took it from me when I was being stupid. Yeah. That's not fair.
Sorry, you carry on.
Okay. So 2015, found Bitcoin. Then I affectionately call myself a former degen crypto trader, right? I was
Love
one
it.
of those guys. Got attracted to the shiny object. I'm like, well, and I just didn't know back then. This was before Bitcoin Twitter. This is before I knew anybody in the space. I was just kind of by myself trying to figure this stuff out. I got attracted to the crypto shiny object. So by the end of 2017, the big bull run, I had sold all. So this is back when also, when you wanted to buy other cryptos, you had to basically, the only trading pairs for the most part were Bitcoin. So you had to sell your Bitcoin. I had to buy Bitcoin and then take my Bitcoin and buy crypto with that. By the end of 2017, I had no Bitcoin and I had tons of these cryptos, and I thought I was a genius, like we all did, like everyone does during a bull market. By the way, this has nothing to do with Vailshire. This is just me personally doing this kind of stuff. I always feel like I need to disclose that. And then 2018 happened. 2018, everything crashed. So all of these cryptos, all these, ICOs and all that nonsense, they dropped 90 to 99%. I had no Bitcoin, and I got hit with just this gigantic tax bill in 2018 for my 2017 successes. But then but all that money was basically gone now, right? A lot of those gains. So I learned a big lesson there. So first of all, I realized, okay, that was really stupid. Second of all, then the block size wars were going on at that time too. And I was one of those people, I was again on the outside. I didn't really know what was going on. I'm like, well, I don't know. That sounds kind of reasonable. Maybe we do need bigger block sizes. And then I heard the people, so all those arguments, we don't have to rehash all that. By 2018, at the end of 2018 and early 2019, I realized there's something to Bitcoin. Like it just keeps sticking around, and it turns out that the smaller block size was probably right for the decentralization aspect. So that makes sense to me. So now I was starting to get it. And then I think Saifedean's book came out right around 2019, and then around that same time, Plan B's stock to flow model came out. And then if you remember, we had that spike where everybody was all excited. Everybody knew that the stock to flow model was the solution.
Yeah.
And right. And so the price spiked, and then we kind of came down again.
I'm telling you, that's going to come back.
You think so?
Yeah. If what happens, if what I think is going to happen over the next few months happens, it's going to be back in range. And I think he will be putting out a narrative of why, it underperformed for a year and a half.
No one's going to take that seriously.
I think some will. I think some people who are new will take it seriously. I mean, he has 1.2 million followers or something, 1.3 million followers. I took it seriously. Actually, do you know what? The interesting thing is about there's very, very highly credible Bitcoiners who took it seriously. I remember being sat with some in Austin, 4 of them, explaining to me why he's right on this. I think even Saifedean was keen on it as well. Like a lot of people, very credible people were keen on it. And I think it was Corey was the first who came out and said, this is fucking bullshit.
Right. And so I was one of those guys too. I was pro stock to flow.
Yeah.
After reading Saifedean's book, because he talks about stock to flow, and then like, wow, this actually makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, but what it doesn't talk about is the demand side of things too, right? So you have to. So that's what Corey brings up. He's all like a demand based guy, and so, there's so many different directions we could go on there, but. What
is your origin story?
Origin. Oh yeah, we're still on that. Okay. So by 2018 and 2019, I had basically gone down the rabbit hole. And so now my next job was, as an advisor, I need to start teaching my clients about that. At first we had zero exposure to Bitcoin. And then I think it was 2019 that I started putting some clients who were amenable to it into it. I would talk about it in my monthly letters and things like that. Then what was great is I had test cases. I had things to compare to. So I had my Vailshire portfolios with Bitcoin, a little bit, like 1% to 2% exposure, and the Vailshire portfolios without. Because the people who didn't have it, they say all the things you say, right? They're scared. It's used by terrorists. It's terrible. The government doesn't approve of it. It's way too volatile. And I was like, you know what though? And Alpha Zeta's done some great work on this stuff too, right? About how it actually decreases portfolio volatility overall, even though it is volatile. It's just how portfolio mechanics work. So what I had to show my clients is, look, here, and I think about in the 80s, in the US at least, we used to have these commercials. They would say, this is your brain, and they'd show an egg, and then they'd crack it, and they'd pop it into the frying pan. They say, this is your brain on drugs. And so I used to tell people, like, this is your portfolio, and this is your portfolio on Bitcoin, and look at the difference. And we have less volatility, but better performance, even with just a little bit of Bitcoin exposure. So I went from 0% of Vailshire clients having Bitcoin to small minority of them to now we have it where everybody has at least some Bitcoin. And so I base our portfolios on 60-40, except it's 60% stocks, 40% sound money. So the ones who are more aggressive have the highest Bitcoin exposure. The ones who are the most conservative, they have a lot of gold and cash exposure plus just a little bit of Bitcoin.
And have any of them, have you had to kind of like hold their hand through the last year or so?
Lots.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been a tough year. So being in finance is very different than being a physician. Being a physician, you have this nice, strong, steady income through thick and thin. In finance, you go up, you ride the cycles. So it's painful. So that is a downside of managing money for people. Is my income went way down over the last year as well. Had to do a lot of hand holding, lost lots of clients. The clients, just like anything, they come in at the wrong times and they leave at the wrong times as far as I'm concerned, right? And Bill Miller, the third, gave some great advice on this that really helped me personally as a fund manager. I can't control when my clients come and when they go. Like they all want to come in at the top. They think you're a magical superstar that can, because we crush the market, in the good years. And then on the tough years, though, they all leave when you're so you're already down and out. Then they give you a kick. I say they punch you in the face and kick you in the shorts. That's kind of what it feels like managing money for people during the downtimes. And lots of people leave. And I'm always like, this is when you should be coming in, right? You should come at the bottom of cycles and get ready to ride up the next cycle higher. But people do what they do, and I just have to let that go because I can't control the flow of clients.
It must be a tough but fascinating time to be managing people's money with everything that's going on.
Oh yeah. Well, it always is, to be honest. But there are some times where it's exceedingly clear from my perspective, from a macro, I'm kind of a macro guy. It's easy sometimes. Like 2022 for me was easy. I got really unpopular on Bitcoin Twitter in 2022 because I was Dr. Bear, they called me. I'm like, it's going to be a bad year, you guys. Like we were sitting at 50,000. I'm like, I think it's going to go lower. We went down to 40. I'm like, I think it could drop in half from here, you guys. That's the stuff I'm looking at. People screamed at me,
Of course they did.
It just hated me. And I'm just like, I'm just telling you what I would want to hear if I was in your shoes, right?
What did you see?
Well, just the macro backdrop was terrible. So I'm a business cycle guy. So I knew that we had crescendoed basically at the end of 2021. I'm a big liquidity guy. So liquidity had basically peaked and was rolling over now, and now it was contracting. The business cycle had peaked and rolled over and was now contracting. And stocks see that. They sense what's going on. They sense the trouble underneath the hood. And actually, Bitcoin, above all, senses both of those things. It senses the health of an economy, but it mostly senses liquidity. It's the great absorber of liquidity. So when you see liquidity start to roll over, Bitcoin just kind of naturally follows what liquidity is doing throughout the world. And so I just saw that coming. And I'm like, this is going to continue based on cyclical things we can look at. You can I can't see the future, but you can compare it to what we had and what's coming up next. And we have many quarters of probably bad performance. So so Bitcoin Miami 2022, I think I was there on stage and I said, Bitcoin was at 40K around there. And I'm like, it's going lower, you guys. Like, don't trade, Bitcoin is savings. You don't trade your savings or your checking account. So that's what I would say. This is a great time to be dollar cost averaging, but just prepare yourself emotionally and mentally. We're probably going to go lower. I wouldn't be surprised if we got cut in half down to 20K. And then it happened. Not that I know the future, but you can just kind of see where things are going. So
how much clarity do you have right now?
Not as much. So that's getting back to your question.
Yeah.
There are times. So why don't I have clarity? Because the data is mixed and weird right now.
Yeah.
And so around the world, there is a clear manufacturing recession going on. Okay, so let me back up. Everything changed with COVID, and that's another major thing. I think of the economy and how stocks and bonds and things flow. They're always cyclical, right? They're like a sine wave. And I play guitar a little bit. It's kind of like a guitar string. What happened with COVID, somebody came and plucked it super hard. They pulled the string down and everything just crashed and came to a halt. Supply chains came to a halt. All of finance, small businesses got just decimated because of what the government forced small businesses to do. We don't have to get into that. But then it creates this sort of shock wave, almost like throwing a rock into a pond or something. It creates these big waves. So there was this massive pull down, and then we had this massive rebound, right? And that was helped by the fiscal stimulus. So the government's like, okay, y'all get free money. We're going to just plop tons of money into your account. And back then I was like, what's this going to do? It's going to cause inflation, real inflation, price inflation to just go to the moon. You can't just give people a ton of free money without expecting prices to go up, right? So we have now a limited supply of goods and services, and people with they're just flush with cash in their bank accounts. So it just by necessity is going to mean that CPI is going to rise and get out of control. which is what happened. And so then we had this spike higher, productivity, GDP, everything went higher to the end of 2021. And then you have that recovery. Now what's happening, like that guitar string, it gets pulled way down, rebounds way up, and now it's kind of going smaller and smaller in between until it kind of stabilizes into a more normal sine wave again. So we're still feeling the effects of that right now. To your question, manufacturing in the US and around the world is clearly already in a recession. It's massive contractionary levels right now. And you see the data just shows that super clearly. But in the US, manufacturing is only a small part of GDP. We're a services economy for the most part.
So is that a massive risk to China?
Sure. Yeah, they are actually showing recessionary conditions right now.
Right.
Their producer price inflation, so what the cost of goods for the producers, the manufacturers, way down. We're actually seeing deflation in China and other parts of Asia right now. So we're seeing that we're heading into, and you could argue we're already in a global synchronized manufacturing recession. The only thing that's holding it up is here in the US, because we have such a strong services component, we are not completely in a services recession right now. And that is the strongest part. That's why the US economy keeps holding up and we have this dichotomy right now. The hard part for me as a fund manager is how do you manage through that? Depending on who you read, and if you pay attention, the bears who are super doom and gloomers, they talk about banks, credit contractions, and they talk about manufacturing recession. Those are the stats that they'll point out. And then you have the super optimistic people. They'll talk about unemployment being low and services is still hanging on there. So that's doing well. That's bullish. Manufacturing is bearish. What are markets going to do? I take those two things, but then for me, what's more important, what supersedes all of that is what is liquidity doing? So net liquidity bottomed in the fourth quarter of 2022, both in the US and in the world, kind of worldwide liquidity, and has been increasing ever since. There was a big scare going into the debt ceiling debacle, the debate, which was resolved with there is no ceiling. Like the emperor is wearing no clothes, right? And so we have unlimited spending ability. The concern with that, and lots of smart people were talking about this leading up to this, what about the refilling of the Treasury General account? Because isn't that going to take liquidity out of the system? But what I was telling people is yes, but what's more important now at this point is to watch what is the overnight reverse repo market doing, because there's over $2 trillion at the time, like $2.2 trillion just sitting there, waiting to be a reserve liquidity option if in case the Treasury General account needs to get refilled. So what we've seen since that was passed.
Well, let's back up a second.
Sure.
Explain to people what the reserve.
Sure. So net liquidity is made up of basically three main components. And so when people think of quantitative tightening and easing, what they're talking about is what is the Fed's balance sheet doing? So the Fed has been, and they're still doing tightening officially, meaning they're letting treasuries and mortgage-backed securities roll off of their balance sheet, so kind of their checking account. That's getting smaller. As that decreases, that is a contractionary net liquidity type event. But that's only one part. Part two is what is the Treasury General account doing? Treasury General account, so the Treasury pays out. So Americans, when you pay taxes, that goes into the Treasury General account, like into their checking account. And then when the Treasury pays out, they do fiscal things like, we're going to create projects, or we're going to invest in something, or we're going to give. Oh, perfect. Yeah. So that's the Fed's balance sheet.
So right Danny's now just brought up a chart.
So what you'll notice is it basically peaked in mid 2022. Mm-hmm. And then that's the quantitative tightening. So they're letting assets roll off. And then when
you say roll off, what does that mean?
So they just let them expire. So what they do is they buy treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, and they have end dates. Mm-hmm. And when the date ends, they just let it. They take the money and let it.
Okay.
They don't buy more.
And then this was the bank failure.
That was the bank failure. So that was the bank term funding program that the regional banks have been accessing. So that's why you saw that spike. So I call those liquidity patches. It's when they see trouble and they see the system is getting shaky, right? And it felt like the world was going to collapse at that point, or at least the banking system was going to collapse. They do these liquidity patches, and that helps stave off a disaster. So that interrupted it, but now they're clearly doing some QT again. Although you'll notice it's not quite as steep as it was before. It's close, but it's if you get to go to June-ish, see how it just a little bit before, go left. Yeah, right in there. See how it flattens out right there? Yeah. So that's more people using the bank term funding program as well. And the FHLB as well, which I can't remember what that stands for.
So that's most likely regional banks feeling a bit of stress.
Yes. So regional banks are feeling stressed, and the Fed is saying, we'll take that garbage that you have, those long dated treasuries that we kind of forced you to buy a few years ago, forced you to buy, people have strong opinions either way. I just think that's kind of the options they had to buy something in a zero interest rate world.
But this is healthy.
So, well, no.
A healthy trajectory?
No. So I think this is stupid that they're doing this.
Okay.
So Powell wants to decrease that. He's being shrewd right now, right? This is what they say they're doing. This is the quantitative tightening. We're gonna go off on a couple tangents here. So this is the quantitative tightening. He says this is what we need to do in order to basically cause the economy contract, destroy demand, bring down inflation, right? So that's number one of net liquidity. Second is the Treasury General Account. When the Treasury General Account fills up, the way to think about it is it's sucking money out of the private sector and putting it onto the government's checking account. So what happened after we got to that debt ceiling debacle, we were almost about to default, and then the Treasury had to refill. I don't know if you have that chart.
Yeah.
Basically, so starting in June, the Treasury went from near zero billions of dollars to now they're up around 400 billion, and that's what they said they're going to go to either 425 or 450 billion dollars to refill the Treasury General Account. That is contractionary. That's net negative for liquidity, which is a net negative for risk assets.
Right.
Third part is the overnight reverse repo market. That's basically.
Danny, can you explain the overnight repo market?
It's been explained to me so many times.
How many times have we had it done? I mean, Lynn's probably done it 10 times.
Before we get to that, here's the Treasury General account.
Yeah, the TGA. So what's that sitting at right now? That's above 500 billion?
Yeah, just above 500.
Yeah, okay. That's nice. I only have a chart that updates weekly, so that's cool. That was what everyone was concerned about, where it went from that bottom near zero, 23 billion, up to where it is now. That was going to suck liquidity out of the system, and people were concerned that was going to cause risk assets to fall. But what I was saying at that time is watch the overnight reverse repo market. And I don't know if you can pull up that chart.
Explain what that is again
so
for the millionth time.
Okay, so you have money market funds.
Yeah.
They give you an interest rate of whatever 4.5% it's sitting at right now. What they do is they park their collateral in the overnight reverse repo market, which is zero risk. And the Federal Reserve says and if you can focus it up on from 2022 to current. Yeah. Okay. So that's really helpful. So they can park it there and get a return. And right now that rate, the award rate, is 5.05% for basically zero risk. You can just park your stuff here. We will give you 5.05%. You can take a little cut of that and then give the rest to your money market fund owners. That's one option they have to have interest.
And how long would they leave it there for?
Overnight.
Literally, it's overnight.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you can keep it there as long as you want.
Right.
But it's pays daily, basically.
Yeah.
So, or they can buy treasuries. So the concern was as the Treasury then to refill its Treasury General Account and to pay for all the fiscal deficits of the U.S., they have to create tons of short-dated T-bills, right? And so now these people are saying, okay, I can leave my money, our money parked here for 5.05% with no risk, or I can buy the no risk T-bills, which are currently, if you see like a 1 month or 3 month T-bills, I think they're between 5.11% for the 1 month and maybe 5.25 or 5.3% for the 3 month Treasury bills.
Why do they need this money overnight?
Why do they leave it?
No, why is it parked overnight? Why is there an overnight reverse repo?
They just have tons of excess cash, and it's a way for them to earn interest.
But why does the Treasury want it overnight?
The Fed.
Sorry, the Fed. Yeah.
The Fed controls the overnight reverse repo market.
But what is reverse repo?
So it's you're parking your collateral with the Fed, and in return, the Fed is giving you. They want this because this is sort of a backup money bag.
Okay.
It's a backup bag of liquidity. And so what they can do then is what they did, they kept that rate at 5.05% while the short T-bills, the shorter term treasury rates, are going higher. And so the people in the money market say, you know what, I can get a better rate if I buy these T-bills. I'm going to pull money out of the overnight reverse repo market, and I'm actually going to buy these T-bills that the Treasury is selling right now. Okay. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's just shifting it from here. And so the Fed uses this as just sort of these bags of it's shifting the liquidity around. Mm-hmm. And it has, because that has gone up so much, so you got the 1 month rate sitting at 5.35%. Yeah. So look at from in that May 2023 time period, and how it's basically just fallen off a cliff. It's gone from 2.25 billion or whatever it was. So 2.27. Now today it's sitting at 1.7. So what that means is, what is that? 700.
Hold on, is that trillion? So that's 1,000.
So think of it in.
You said 1.7, but is that 1,700 billion?
Yes, which so where Danny has the marker at trillion. So 2.27 trillion.
Yeah.
It was at towards the end of May. It's fallen all the way down to 1.8 trillion.
So what's this telling us?
That means that all of the concern we had about the TGA getting refilled and sucking liquidity out of the system, actually most of that came out of the overnight reverse repo market. So that offset the liquidity contraction. So net, it's basically net negative. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So liquidity basically just is kind of going sideways, even though people were concerned that it was going to drop off a cliff and risk assets were going to get hammered.
Does that play into this Treasury General account, how this increased by 500 billion?
Yes.
So that's where the 500 billion's gone?
Yes, for the most part.
So it's just moved from the Fed to
It's just shift pockets, basically. And so the private markets weren't really affected by that. So that's why we're still seeing a good performance in stocks and Bitcoin, things like that. They didn't fall off a cliff, which a lot of people were concerned about. All that did is it just kept that stuff just all shifting. So if at some point so that's what I was watching. This is the best case scenario. I wanted to see the overnight. If I was long risk assets and long Bitcoin, I want to see that going down. And they still have 1.8 trillion sitting there just as reserve liquidity, waiting to come out into the system. So, which it can. So the way the Fed manipulates that is they could say, you know what, we want even more to come out. We're going to lower the reward rate in the overnight reverse repo market from 5.05%. Let's put it down to 4.5%. Then people will even more soak up. They'll buy more. They'll pull money out of that.
Money into the bond.
Yep. And then the more flush that the bank reserves are in the U.S., the more they can take their excess liquidity and move it further out on the risk curve and cause risk assets to rise in price. Does that all make sense?
I see, yeah. I think so.
It's
I definitely couldn't explain it, but it makes a lot more sense.
What's that?
Bullish for Bitcoin.
It's not, well, I would say it's not bearish for Bitcoin.
Okay.
What will be bullish for Bitcoin is when the Fed finally pivots and says, we're doing, so the first thing we looked at with the Fed's balance sheet, how it's still going down, we want to see that going back up again.
So CPI print this morning was 3%. Yeah. Interesting thing that Preston said last night, where he said inflation in the UK is quoted about 9%. It's actually about 11.5%. But in the US, it was quoted at 4%, but it's actually 2%.
He was looking at the Trueflation metric, that site. I don't know how I haven't looked into it enough, but yeah.
But down to 3% means trajectory wise, we're heading towards that kind of 2% they want. Is there a chance they overshoot and we head to deflation?
Oh, sure. Could we get a deflationary bust? Yeah. If they continue to stay hawkish as the economy is rolling over and we're having this, at least manufacturing recession, everything is sort of on the edge right now. So if I were Powell, what I would say is, we've done it. I would give myself a pat on the back. We've done a great job. I would take all the credit for it, even though it's more of the markets and not what they're doing. And then I would say we've gone far enough. Before we break anything, let's ease off a little bit. And I would actually lower rates at this point a little bit. Now he's going to come out and he's not going to do that. They're going to stay hawkish and they're going to say, we don't want a repeat of the 1970s, so we can't get easy too quickly. I don't want to be known as Arthur Burns. I want to be known as Paul Volcker. And so I'm going to slay inflation. But I think he's going to overdo it. And so the longer they keep these tightened conditions, too hawkish conditions, the more they risk more bank failures, slowing the economy too much. Economy doesn't like that. Risk assets, if they sense that, then the floor will drop out and we could have a late 2008, early 2009 moment where everything crashes and we actually see actual deflation. That's not good. And that would cause them to quickly pivot. They'll quickly lower rates, go back to QE. There'll be chaos everywhere, blood in the streets. Bitcoin.
So how bad is deflation? Because there are people in the world of Bitcoin who say deflation's fine.
Depends what we're talking about. And like Jeff Snyder talks about this, a lot of smart people talk about this. I have massive respect for Jeff Snyder, but I think he's wrong in this. He's wrong because he's correct in terms of government fiat. When you have depreciating currency, fiat currency, you have to have inflation to make it go. Deflation is the death knell of an inflationary currency and an expansionary credit-based Keynesian system. Bitcoin is different. It's just built differently. It's an equity-based system. It's designed to be deflationary, or at the very least disinflationary. And so they're two different things. So what I've noticed is all of the people who seem like they're right there, like as Foss would say, they're on the 1 yard line. They ran the ball all the way, and they just can't quite get in the end zone. It's because they're stuck on this aspect. They're so used to the government fiat system that they can't imagine an entirely different system that's built on deflation. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think there's a risk we head into a recession with inflation?
So what I think the most likely outcome for this decade is basically a period of stagflation, so stagnant economy.
Yeah.
Possibly dipping into a recession, and then popping out of it again, and sticky high and volatile inflation. So very different from last decade, right, where we just had kind of a strong economy, very, very low, abnormally low inflation and near zero interest rates. I think this decade is going to be, I think even though the causes are different, I think it will look and feel a lot like the 1970s. Based on kind of what history, obviously, we weren't old enough for that. We were probably both born in the 70s, but so I can't really remember it. But looking back, I think that period of uncertainty, inflation spiking off and on, and the Fed, heroically coming in to save us with their policies, even though I think they probably caused more harm than good. And then just a frustratingly weak economy, I think is what we're going to be stuck with. We're just overextended. When you're over indebted, you're basically pushing this mountain ahead of you, and you're stealing future productivity, future growth, and we're getting it all today. You can only do that for so long before the game runs out, right? So you get the Japanification concern at some point that we just can't grow out of this anymore because we just have too much debt. I think there's going to be more and more talk about a debt jubilee this decade, which is insanity that we would come to that point. But
is there an alternative option?
Well, Bitcoin. And
to an extent,
and I actually mean that. I think that if so say just today, Powell resigned and they pulled me in as Fed chair, or maybe Yellen resigned and I took over as Treasury, or I would want much smarter people than me. But so say I got forced in that position, the first thing I would do is I would start buying Bitcoin as a reserve asset and start strengthening our economy. And when you do that, like I talked about earlier, it forces an honest unit of account, right? It forces austerity where you don't want it, even if it's unpopular. It forces you to quit stealing from the future and taking the benefits today and giving our problems to our kids and our grandkids, which is just treachery, I think. I just think it's insane what we do in the US and basically the entire Western world. It would be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. And if you did that over time, what we'd do is we would start generating growth again, and we would grow out of this debt. And because we would stop taking new debt on, and Bitcoin, as the government bought it, it would start increasing the price. It would start bringing wealth back to the people who own it as well. Right. And so you're going to start growing the GDP in different ways that are very different from now. And you're going to start creating this sort of inner system inside this big blob of debt and low growth and frustration and hopelessness. You're going to create this little ball of light that's going to be this equity-based income generating type nidus that is going to grow and grow, and eventually grow it into expand and explode that debt bubble that we're in right now. So it's hard to understand, but I think it's something needs to happen that's dramatic, right? You can either have it, because with a debt jubilee, there are lots of things to think about. First of all, it's going to cause chaos. It's only going to stoke and increase geopolitical tensions. It could end up in a war. I know you're probably familiar with the fourth turning kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We're sort of in a fourth turning period right now. It's probably actually going to end with a major war, which none of us want. So what are some alternatives? And I think Bitcoin is just literally the most viable solution. I'm just hoping that government embraces it. And that's why it's encouraging to come back to your point that politicians, political candidates, even if they're not overly serious and they're not the front runners, they're still talking about Bitcoin, and they're still pandering to this audience. That did not happen 4 years ago. So we are moving in the right direction. The fact that Larry Fink, who's the king of ESG, is officially on Bitcoin's side now, it literally changed the narrative in one day. That's what I think is the most important thing about Larry Fink.
So how Larry said last night.
Yeah, and I agree completely with that. The narrative shifted the second he said that, and literally that day, a couple hours later, not to dox my father-in-law, but he's been very anti-Bitcoin and kind of thinks it's funny that I've been into it and says, well, it's used by criminals and it's bad for the environment and it wastes energy, and I'm like, no. But that's the narrative he has heard because people like Larry Fink and the big brokerage houses have been talking about that. That day he called and he was interested in Bitcoin for the first time, and I think that's not unusual, and I think it's not a surprise. So the fact that the narrative is changing is super encouraging to me, whether or not a spot Bitcoin ETF gets approved. And you guys have probably noticed too, but it's almost like all the headline machine just kind of got turned off and they're not talking about it anymore.
Do you know what it's like? It's like, when it's, it's like storms. You look across the horizon, storms, and then the clouds part and the sun comes through.
Yes.
It kind of is like that moment. It is a bit misleading. Somebody put out that, Larry Fink has come out as pro-Bitcoin, and look at all these positive news articles from Forbes. That's actually a little bit disingenuous because Forbes has been positive for a long time. I think, what's that guy, Level 39?
Yep.
Yeah, he put out a thread, very good thread, listed those journalists and how they've declared they hold Bitcoin, how they've been writing positive Bitcoin for a while. So that was a bit disingenuous. I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but at the same time, I think we are going to just naturally see that shift. I'm waiting for the first positive New York Times. Yeah, here we go. So Level 39, at Level 39, big shout out to you. The idea that BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF is responsible for recent positive Bitcoin coverage, and Forbes ignores that many contributors have been working tirelessly for months on reframing Bitcoin in the press. Let's meet those contributors hard at work. So he goes down, and you've got Plebius, economist, and Crypto Bastardo, who I interviewed in Venezuela, actually. And so he's just listed them all. So it's really, really cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
But I guess my rebuttal to that is nobody cared though that they were doing this until Larry Fink did what he did.
Yeah, but give me a New York Times.
Yes.
Bitcoin is good for the environment article, and then it's like, right, let's go.
We're in.
Yeah, we're in.
I agree.
And I think it's going to come. I mean, I think the narrative shift has been coming, and I think it's kind of getting to the point whereby it's kind of been embarrassing, some of the people coming out against Bitcoin and how they've been coming out against it. And we've seen lots of different things. I think Alex Gladstein has been great on the narrative side. I think Jason Meyer, him coming out with his book's been super useful. And then look, the tireless work that other people have done from years, from Pierre Rochard's to Bistein's. Like, there's so many people over the years who try to frame it always in the right way. Getting that leaking out into the mainstream press is super important. Natalie Brunell does really great interviews covering it as well. Big shout out to Natalie. And so, we are seeing that shift. I think it's almost moronic now when you see these articles come out as very anti-Bitcoin.
Right.
It's like, what's your agenda here?
Right.
The next step is the politicians. These presidential candidates have realized, and we do have a number of people like Cynthia Lames, Ted Cruz, who are pro-Bitcoin and understand it. It's going to be interesting what happens to the likes of Elizabeth Warren, because she has an anti-crypto army, which, by the way, we're kind of on the same page, part of that.
Right.
But if she actually comes out with a shift and says, I got this wrong, that's when it will be interesting, a game changer.
I do think there's a massive difference between someone like Cynthia Lummis, who's clearly a Bitcoiner, and the people that have come out just begging Bitcoiners for money. I think we're very naive, and anyone who says pro-Bitcoin, we're like throwing money at them as a community, as an industry. But Cynthia Lummis is very different. I think you need to keep her in a completely separate bracket.
Yeah, but I do trust RFK on this issue, and I don't agree. Well, I'd love to know your views on him and his anti-vaccine. I don't want to say anti-vaccine. I think that's always a pejorative term, but he is skeptical of vaccines. I'd love to know yours. Maybe we'll do that offline. But I'm nervous around that. But you never agree with a politician on everything. But I believe him when he is pro-Bitcoin. I believe he gets it. And I don't trust Ted Cruz, but I think Ted Cruz understands money. And DeSantis, to some extent, very anti-CBDC, and I'm not a DeSantis fan. But I don't believe Vivek. And that's not to say I'm anti-Vivek. I'd happily sit down with him again and have a conversation, but I don't believe he is a Bitcoiner. I think he's a fiat Bitcoiner, maybe. He's a BlackRock Bitcoiner.
A BlackRock Bitcoiner.
BlackRock Bitcoiner.
That could catch on.
Yeah, man. We need a translation done, don't we?
What do you mean?
The Luke Woman tweet.
Oh.
We got this tweet from Luke Woman, and for the best of me, used every bit of energy I have to try and translate this tweet. Okay.
You posted this today.
Yeah, the Fed getting inflation down before debt to GDP was inflated back to sustainable levels. It's like watching a dog catch the car. Okay, you caught it. Now what are you going to do with that? All right, I'm cool here. Is this bit. Here's how fast positive real rates induces fiscal dominance with debt to GDP and deficits this high. I don't understand it. What's he saying here? I hope you can do this.
I know you put me on the spot here. If we put the three of our heads together, maybe we can translate what Luke is trying to say. He's so smart.
I assume he's saying that they've not inflated the debt away. They didn't leave inflation high enough for long enough to inflate the debt away.
Yeah. And I think that this kind of gets back to and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but what I was talking about with the 70s, the kind of stagflationary episode, is just because we got it down here now at these levels does not mean that we're through the woods yet, right? It's going to come back and it's going to rear its ugly head. And I think that's why Powell is going to talk about, he's still going to speak hawkishly, even though we should be cheering. Lots of people, the markets are cheering that the CPI is down to 3%. We're not through the woods yet. I think inflation itself is kind of entrenched this decade. It's here to stay. The only way to get out of that is by growing our GDP, but we have this stagnant economy. And again, I think that's what he's talking about, the debt to GDP ratio. You have two factors there. You can get your debt down or your GDP up. We're obviously not going to get our debt down, so you have to grow your GDP. And I don't see lots of hope for that this decade. I think we're just going to have a stagnant economy, and it's going to be almost impossible to grow out of that and to get that debt to GDP number down. So it's encouraging in the short term, but we're not through the inflation story yet. And I think we're going to be talking about this, unfortunately, for years and years.
Coinbase is trending. I always think it's funny to see the things that are trending together. Coinbase, the FBI, and Tate. Why is Coinbase trending?
I don't know. Probably because it's down again. Because Bitcoin's pumping.
So Bank of America just closed my personal bank account that I've used for 15 years for no reason. Welcome to my world, Manib. For a reason, I do Coinbase transactions through this account for Bitcoin. This is a war on Bitcoin and crypto. Please, Art. I mean, that's just... Why would Bank of America be doing that at a time?
Oh, that's why.
Yeah, that would be why.
Kathy Wood sold Coinbase shares. I saw that earlier.
They're yo-yoing in and out of Coinbase quite a bit.
Yeah, her timing isn't awesome.
No.
I actually like a lot of what she has to say, but man, she makes
I have seen this the last few days as well.
In March 2020, Coinbase held over 1 million Bitcoin. This has now dropped to 439,000. The exchanges are being drained. Bitcoin is the cusp of true price discovery. That's a few exchanges. Can we see all exchanges? Is that a Glassnode thing?
Yeah, I don't know if I have access to that chart. Let me try.
Willie would know. But I've heard it's everywhere.
I'm sure it is after last year. If it's not, you'd be done.
It's that root chart, isn't it?
Rational root.
Yeah. Well, we should definitely do this again. Love this. Yeah. And would love to have you over in the UK and sit down and chat again at some point, take you to a football match.
I would love it. See some real football. That'd be great.
Yeah, this was awesome. Loved it. Tell people how to follow your newsletter.
Sure. So I'm most active on Twitter. My handle is at Vailshire Cap. You can find me there. And then if like I said, I manage money and run a hedge fund. You could send me an email directly at info@vailshire.com or just check out vailshire.com, the website, and be happy to get back to you.
Did you find it? You can't have it, fuckers. All right. See you later, man.